Hey, in this video we'll be talking about functions. So functions are a way to create reusable code that can be encapsulated in one location in your project and can be used anywhere else in your project. So another great thing about functions is that they act as a kind of organization tool for your code. If you have code that does something useful, put it in a function. And then it's in a specific spot, even with a name, and you can find it easily and reuse it. So we're looking in Visual Studio, where I have just a Hello World program, and I'm going to just introduce what a function looks like in C#. So we have been using functions this whole time. Anytime that you have some sort of identifier, like console.writeLine, and you have parentheses after it, you're using a function. That's really what it is. This is a function call or a function invocation. When you invoke or call a function, you're using it. You're making it do something, asking it to do something. And so we can already see some of the parts of a function. We can see that a function has an identifier, has a name. It has a thing in parentheses. And the stuff that you put in parentheses are input to the function. They're things that the function is going to use to do its job. In particular, this console.writeLine writes out to the console, prints to the console, and the input it needs is what it's going to put on the console. All right, so to make our own custom function, we're going to follow this pattern. And it's going to kind of look like this main function here. We've seen this before. Functions have to be defined outside of all other functions, but inside a class. So here is a class, might as well do it here, and I want to be outside of the main function so that I can declare a new one. For the time being, just regular old functions that don't depend on any particular class, we're going to use the static keyword. And I'm going to put this for now, I'll put this in a comment so that I can just type stuff and not worry about it giving me errors. So start with static. So that means that the function is going to be kind of self-contained. We can call into it and not worry about which object it's referring to. So it'll work just like these other functions like console.writeLine. So static comes first, and then we need the return type. So I'm just going to call it return type for now. And then the identifier, which is the name of the function. Then we need parentheses, and then we need a bunch of arguments. So bunch of arguments. And this argument list is going to be separated by commas. All right, and then that is the signature line of the function. So the signature line tells us everything we need to know to actually use the function. It just doesn't tell us what the function necessarily does. The identifier should be chosen so that it kind of gives you an idea of what the function is supposed to do. And so something like writeLine tells us what it's going to do. So if we're going to call the function, all we need to know is the name of the function. We need to know what kind of arguments it's expecting. Those are the input to the function. And we need to know what kind of return type it has, because if it's returning a value, that value is probably going to be useful to us. All right, now to define what it does, we need a block of code denoted by curly braces. So with those curly braces, we can then put stuff in here, statements, right? So that's what a function is going to look like. At the end of a function, after we're done everything that we need to do or calculate or whatever, eventually we're going to return something, return some value, a value of the return type. And that return keyword is going to be what ends the function and gives us a value coming out of that function. And we'll see how that works in a moment. So let's make a function. Let's see, what's a good one? Let's do like the area of a shape. That's a pretty useful function. So let's say static, if we want the area of something, it's probably going to be like a real number, like a decimal number. So let's use the float as a return type. And then the identifier, let's say triangle area. So for calculating the area of a triangle, we want something like the base and the height measurements. So let's have base and height. Base happens to be a keyword in C#, so it might not let me actually use that. Let's just call it B and H for consistency. All right. So now I've got a function signature that says, if you call this triangle area function, you need to provide two floating point values, B and H, can be any numbers, and I'll give you a floating point value out of that. So all we really need to do in this function is that calculation, return, and the calculation for triangle area is 1/2 base times height. And there we go. There's our first function. Now, that's our definition for the function. When we want to use it, we have to use it in some other place like our main function. And we call it by referring to the identifier, specifying the base and the height. So let's say a triangle 5 base and 9 height. It's a pretty tall triangle. And then we want to use the return values in some way. So let's just get it in some floating point variable here. And that's good. Now we can do whatever we want with it. Maybe just printing it out is fine. Oops. There we go. Pretty nice. So not all functions have a return type. You can see in the main function we return void as a type. Void means that there is no return type. It's not a real type that you can use for variables. So functions like that return void, should do something. They should have some useful side effect. So one pretty common side effect is to just like print stuff. So let's say print this many times, right? And then we'll say here's a string to print, and here is the number of times to print it. So here we don't have a return type, so a return statement like this would just end the function and not give us back any output, which is fine. But we don't really need one. Once we get to the end of the function is going to be done. So we can just implement our function. And there we go. So that just prints it that many times. Let's try it out. All right, there we go. So we have hello world printed out. We've got our triangle area. That looks like it probably calculated it right and printed a message 3 times the way that we told it to. Cool. So there are lots of different things we can do with functions. This really opens up a new category of complexity for your programs and helps you organize them better. There are functions that take no arguments. There are functions that take tons of arguments, and some with no return type or any of the return types that we've seen so far. So try to make your own functions. Think of some useful things that you can do with them, and I'll see you later.